The blood-red sunset painted the Montana Territory sky as Xander Lockhart pulled his rifle from its saddle holster, eyes fixed on the horizon where dust clouds signaled approaching riders. His loyal stallion Thunderbolt sensed the danger, ears pricking forward as the 17-year-old horse shifted nervously beneath him. The year was 1877, and in this untamed corner of the West, a man traveling alone had to remain vigilant. "Easy, Thunder," Xander murmured, patting the dappled gray's neck. "Just some travelers, probably." But his gut told him otherwise. Squinting against the dying light, he counted 5 riders approaching fast, too fast for friendly folk. Xander turned Thunder toward a nearby ridge, giving himself the advantage of high ground. The stallion responded instantly to the gentle pressure of his knees, a connection built through 8 years of partnership. When Xander had found the horse, it had been a half-wild 9-year-old with trust issues and a fear of men. Now, Thunder was as much a part of him as his own shadow. The riders came into view, and Xander's suspicions were confirmed. He recognized the leader, Jesse Benson, a cattle rustler with a bounty that would keep a man comfortable through winter. Xander wasn't a bounty hunter by trade, but he'd tangled with Benson's crew before. "They've spotted us," he whispered, feeling Thunder's muscles tense beneath him. "Let's ride." They galloped north, toward the jagged mountains where Xander knew every trail and hiding place. Thunder's powerful strides ate up the distance, but the riders behind gained ground. The stallion was older now, no longer the tireless runner of his youth. A shot cracked the air, whistling past Xander's ear. He leaned low over Thunder's neck, urging more speed from his loyal companion. Another shot, then another. The 4th bullet found its mark not in Xander but in Thunder's flank. The horse stumbled, recovered, and pressed on with labored breathing. Xander felt the warm wetness of blood against his leg where it pressed against Thunder's side. "Just a little farther, boy," he encouraged, heart breaking at the stallion's wheezing breaths. They reached a narrow pass between 2 rock formations, and Xander guided Thunder through, then dismounted quickly. With practiced movements, he pulled his rifle and took aim at the approaching riders. 2 quick shots sent them scrambling for cover. He fired again, deliberately missing but keeping them pinned down. Thunder collapsed behind him, legs finally giving out. Xander's stomach twisted as he fired one more shot before turning to his horse. "No, no, no," he whispered, kneeling beside the stallion. The bullet had torn through muscle and likely punctured a lung. Thunder's breathing came in ragged, wet gasps. Xander tore off his bandana, pressing it against the wound, though he knew it was futile. The horse's dark eyes, once so full of fire, now gazed at him with pain and something like acceptance. "I'm sorry," Xander said, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, boy." A shot ricocheted off the rocks nearby, reminding him of the danger, but Xander couldn't move. Not now. Not with Thunder dying before him. His oldest friend, his most loyal companion through years of loneliness on the frontier. From the corner of his eye, he saw one of Benson's men making a move to flank him. Xander raised his rifle mechanically and fired, hearing a cry of pain as the man fell back. The others held their position, unwilling to risk crossing the open ground before the pass. Thunder's breathing grew more labored. Xander set down his rifle and cradled the horse's massive head in his lap, tears flowing freely down his sun-weathered face. "You rest now," he whispered. "You've carried me far enough." As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Thunder's eyes dulled and his breathing slowed, then stopped altogether. Xander didn't move, remaining with his hand resting on the horse's neck, weeping silently as darkness fell around them. A voice from the shadows startled him. "They're gone, rode off when night fell." Xander grabbed his rifle, aiming toward the voice, but his hands shook too badly to hold steady. A woman stepped into view, hands raised slightly. "I'm not with them," she said softly. "I was tracking them myself when I saw what happened." She moved closer, moonlight revealing her features. Dark hair pulled back under a wide-brimmed hat, practical riding clothes, and a revolver holstered at her hip. Her face was dust-streaked but striking, with high cheekbones and clear eyes that reflected starlight. "Belle Blackburn," she said. "Bounty hunter." Xander lowered his rifle slowly. "Xander Lockhart." Belle's gaze moved to Thunder's still form, then back to Xander's tear-streaked face. Without judgment or hesitation, she knelt beside him. "You gave him love," she said quietly. "That's all any soul needs in this life." Xander stared at her, something in her simple words breaking through his grief. He nodded once, unable to speak. "We need to move," Belle continued gently. "They might come back with reinforcements." "I won't leave him here," Xander said, finding his voice. Belle considered this, then nodded. "There's a homestead about 2 miles east, abandoned. We can take him there, give him a proper burial." They worked together in silence, fashioning a travois from branches and Xander's blanket. Belle's horse, a sturdy buckskin mare, seemed to understand the solemnity of their task as she pulled Thunder's body through the darkness. The abandoned homestead was a simple cabin with a small barn and corral. Under the cold light of the moon, they dug a grave behind the barn. Belle worked alongside Xander without complaint, her movements efficient and respectful. When Thunder was finally laid to rest, Xander stood with his hat in his hands, words catching in his throat. "He was a good horse," Belle said, filling the silence. "You can see it in how he carried himself, even at the end." "Best I ever knew," Xander managed. "Found him being mistreated by a cruel owner. Bought him with nearly every cent I had. Took months before he'd let me near him without flinching." "Yet he died trying to save you," Belle observed. "That's not just training, that's love." They covered the grave in silence, then made their way to the cabin. It was dusty but sound, with a fireplace and crude furniture left behind by whoever had given up on frontier life. Belle built a small fire while Xander sat at the rough-hewn table, staring at nothing. She placed a cup of coffee before him, the aroma pulling him back to the present. "Why were you tracking Benson's gang?" he asked finally. $500, she answered. "Dead or alive, though I prefer alive. Justice should be public." Xander studied her. Female bounty hunters were rare but not unheard of. What struck him was her confidence, the way she moved with purpose and spoke without apology. "How'd you get into this line of work?" he asked. Belle sipped her coffee. "My father was a lawman in Texas. Taught me to shoot, track, and uphold justice. When he died, I took up his mantle in my own way. And your mother, Apache. She taught me to move silently and read signs most people miss." Belle's eyes met his. "And you, what's your story, Xander Lockhart?" "No story. Just a drifter who's seen too much and stayed too long in this life." Belle didn't press, just nodded as if she understood perfectly. They fell into silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. "You can have the bed," Xander said eventually. "I'll take the floor. Don't be foolish. We're both adults, and that bed's big enough for 2 without impropriety." Xander looked at her sharply, but saw no flirtation in her expression, only practicality. He nodded once. That night, lying back to back in the dusty bed, Xander found himself thinking not of Thunder's death but of Belle's words. "You gave him love. That's all any soul needs." When dawn broke, Xander woke to find Belle already up, cooking something over the rekindled fire. "Hope you like rabbit," she said without turning. "Caught him while you were still snoring." "I don't snore," Xander replied automatically, then added, "Thank you." They ate in companionable silence before Belle broached the subject they'd been avoiding. I'm still going after Benson. $500 is $500. Xander set down his plate. I'll ride with you. Belle raised an eyebrow. You don't have a horse. The simple statement hit Xander like a physical blow, reminding him of all he'd lost the previous night, but it also crystallized his resolve. I'm a good tracker, decent with a rifle, and Benson's men shot my horse. I'm riding with you if you'll have me. Belle studied him, then nodded once. We'll need to find you a mount. There's a ranch about 10 miles north, Xander said. Owner owes me a favor. They set out on Belle's buckskin, Xander riding behind her. He was acutely aware of her back against his chest, the way she guided the mare with subtle movements of her body rather than harsh rein commands. She rode like she'd been born to it. The ranch belonged to an old friend, Samuel Jenkins, who greeted Xander with a hearty handshake that turned to sympathy when he heard about Thunder. Damn shame, Sam said, shaking his head. That was a fine animal. I need a horse, Sam, Xander said simply. Sam nodded. Got a 3-year-old Mustang, spirited but sound. Not Thunder, but he might do. The Mustang was a deep chestnut with one white sock and a blaze down his face. His eyes were intelligent and wary as Xander approached. He's green, Sam warned. Only been under saddle a few months. Xander extended his hand, letting the young horse catch his scent. What's his name? Haven't given him one. Figured whoever rode him should name him. After some consideration, Xander said Ember for his color. Belle watched from the fence as Xander gently worked with Ember, establishing trust through quiet movements and soft words. By afternoon, the horse was accepting Xander's saddle and following basic commands. You have a way with them, Belle observed as they prepared to leave. They know when you respect them, Xander replied. Sam refused payment for Ember. Consider it partial payment for that time you saved my herd from rustlers, he insisted. He also provided supplies, ammunition, food, and an extra canteen. As they rode away, Belle glanced at Xander. You didn't mention you'd tangled with rustlers before. Wasn't relevant, he shrugged. It was 3 years ago. Was it Benson's gang? Xander nodded. They tried to take Sam's herd while he was laid up with a broken leg. I happened to be working for him then. So this is personal, Belle concluded. It became personal when they shot Thunder, Xander corrected. Before that, it was just bad history. They rode north, following the trail Belle had identified before encountering Xander. She explained that Benson's gang had robbed a bank in Helena and were likely heading for the Canadian border. We need to cut them off before they reach it, she said. Once they cross, that bounty's as good as gone. They rode hard for 2 days, stopping only when necessary. Ember proved himself a worthy mount, strong and willing despite his inexperience. At night, they shared a small fire and took turns keeping watch. On the 3rd night, as they sat beside the embers of their fire, Belle asked the question Xander had been expecting. Why do you drift? A man with your skills could build something. Xander stared into the flames. I tried settling once. Had a small spread in Colorado, wife, baby on the way. Belle waited silently for him to continue. Influenza took them both in '73, he said finally. After that, walls felt like a prison, so I drift. Belle reached across the space between them, her hand covering his briefly. I'm sorry. Xander nodded, surprised to find the pain was duller now, a scar rather than an open wound. What about you? Why chase bounties instead of finding a homestead? Freedom, Belle answered simply. Out here I answer to no one, I make my own way. No thoughts of family, Belle's expression softened slightly. Sometimes. But it would take a special kind of man to accept a wife who can outshoot him and refuses to sit at home waiting. Their eyes met across the dying fire, and something unspoken passed between them. Xander felt a stirring he hadn't experienced in years possibility. The moment broke when Ember nickered softly, ears pricked toward the north. Both Xander and Belle were instantly alert, hands moving to their weapons. "Riders," Belle whispered, tilting her head to listen. "3, maybe 4. They quickly doused the fire and moved into the shadows of nearby trees. Through his field glasses, Xander confirmed what they'd suspected: Benson and 3 of his men, riding hard. "They're not running anymore," Xander observed. "They're hunting." "Us," Belle agreed. "They must have spotted our trail. Or they have friends in unexpected places," Xander suggested, thinking of the trading post where they'd stopped for supplies that morning. They waited until Benson's group had passed, then followed at a distance. Their plans changed from pursuit to careful stalking. The hunters had become the hunted. Benson's gang made camp near a creek, seemingly unconcerned about being followed. Their confidence suggested they believed they had the upper hand. "We take them tonight," Belle decided. "While they're sleeping." Xander nodded. "I'll circle around to the east. You take the west. Wait for my signal." Under the cover of darkness, they separated, each approaching the camp from a different direction. Xander moved silently through the underbrush, Thunderbolt's spirit seeming to guide his steps. When he was in position, he gave the signal, a perfect imitation of a screech owl. Belle's answering call came moments later. Xander aimed carefully and fired, the shot hitting the coffee pot sitting by the fire. The camp exploded into activity, men scrambling for weapons. Belle's first shot took down one of Benson's men with a wound to the shoulder. "Drop your weapons," Xander called. "You're surrounded." Gunfire erupted as the outlaws returned fire, bullets splintering trees around Xander. He kept his position, firing methodically. From across the camp, Belle did the same. One of Benson's men made a break for the horses. Belle's shot caught him in the leg, sending him tumbling to the ground. The remaining henchman threw down his gun, hands raised in surrender, but Benson himself was nowhere to be seen. "Watch him," Xander called to Belle, indicating the surrendered man. "Benson's running." He dashed to where the horses were tethered, finding Ember still secure but one of the outlaws' mounts missing. Without hesitation, Xander swung into the saddle and spurred after Benson, following the sound of hoofbeats through the darkness. The chase led through dense forest and across a shallow river. Ahead, Xander caught glimpses of Benson's horse, a large black stallion pushing hard. Ember, despite his youth, kept pace admirably. They burst into a clearing, and suddenly Benson wheeled his horse around, gun drawn. Xander barely had time to duck as a bullet whizzed past his head. He threw himself from Ember's back, rolling to the ground as another shot kicked up dirt beside him. "Should have minded your own business, Lockhart," Benson shouted. Xander crawled behind a fallen log, checking his rifle. "You made it my business when you shot my horse," he called back. "That old nag," Benson laughed. "Did you a favor?" Rage boiled in Xander's chest. He carefully sighted along his rifle, waiting. Patience had always been his strength. Benson fired again, the bullet splintering wood above Xander's head. Then came the sound Xander had been waiting for, the click of an empty chamber. Xander rose and fired in one fluid motion. His bullet struck Benson's shooting arm, sending the outlaw's revolver flying. Benson clutched his bleeding arm, hatred burning in his eyes. "It's over, Benson," Xander said, approaching with his rifle trained on the man's chest. "It ain't never over," Benson spat, his good hand suddenly producing a hidden derringer. Before he could fire, another shot rang out. Benson jerked, then fell, a red stain spreading across his chest. Behind him stood Belle, her smoking revolver steady in her hand. "He always was too fond of that little hideaway gun," she remarked, moving forward to check Benson's pulse. "Dead," Xander lowered his rifle slowly. You followed. Of course I did, Belle replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Left the others tied up. We can collect them on the way back. They stood in silence, looking down at Benson's body. The man had terrorized the territory for years, leaving grief and destruction in his wake. Now he was just another body on the frontier. I would have preferred him alive, Belle sighed. But a dead bounty pays too. How will you prove it's him? Xander asked. Belle produced a small knife and cut a distinctive ring from Benson's finger. This was mentioned in the wanted poster. It'll be enough. They returned to the outlaw camp, where the two wounded men and their surrendered companion remained secured. By dawn, they were heading back toward civilization, the outlaws' horses pulling a makeshift travois carrying Benson's body. The journey to Helena took 3 days. They traveled slowly due to their prisoners, camping each night with careful watches. During those quiet hours, Xander found himself drawn more and more to Belle's strength and quiet confidence. On the second night, as they sat beside their fire after the prisoners were secured, Belle surprised him by asking, "What will you do after this is over?" Xander considered the question. "Haven't thought that far ahead." "You should," Belle said. "A man shouldn't live only in the present." "What about you? After the bounty's collected," Belle's eyes reflected the firelight, "there's always another bounty." "Is that enough?" Xander asked softly. She looked at him, then really looked at him. "It has been, until now." The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and tentative. Xander reached across the space separating them and took her hand. She didn't pull away. They reached Helena on the 4th day, delivering the living outlaws to the sheriff and Benson's body to the undertaker for verification. The bounty was paid in full, $500, as promised. As they stood on the main street afterward, the money secured in Belle's saddlebags, an awkward silence fell between them. "Well," Belle said finally, "I suppose this is where we part ways." Xander looked at her, this extraordinary woman who had helped him through his grief and fought at his side. The thought of returning to his solitary existence suddenly seemed unbearable. "It doesn't have to be," he said. "There's a lot of country out there, a lot of justice needing to be done." Belle studied him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Are you suggesting a partnership, Mr. Lockhart?" "I'm suggesting a beginning," Xander replied honestly. "The rest we figure out as we go." Belle's smile widened. "I'd like that." They rode out of Helena together that afternoon, heading south toward Wyoming territory where another bounty awaited. As they traveled, Xander found himself watching Ember's confident strides, the way the young horse had already bonded with him. Different from Thunder, but special in his own right. "He's going to be a fine horse," Belle commented, noticing his attention. "Yes," Xander agreed. "Different journey, different companion." Belle's eyes met his, understanding his deeper meaning. "That's the way of life, isn't it? We lose, we grieve, but then we find new connections." That night, their camp made and the horses tended, Xander and Belle sat side by side watching the stars emerge. When she leaned against his shoulder, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When he turned to kiss her, it felt like coming home. 6 months later, they stood together on a ridge overlooking a small valley in western Colorado. Below them stretched fertile land bordered by a clear creek, land for sale, according to the notice they'd seen in the last town. "What do you think?" Xander asked, watching Belle's face carefully. She surveyed the valley, then turned to him with a smile. "Room for horses," she observed. "Good water, defensible position." "But is it what you want?" he pressed. "You said freedom was important to you." Belle reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I've learned something these past months. Freedom isn't just about answering to no one. It's about choosing who to answer to." She looked out over the valley again. We could build something here, something good. Xander pulled her close, his heart fuller than he'd believed possible after all his loss. A home, he agreed, but not the end of adventures. Belle laughed, the sound echoing across the valley that would soon be theirs. Never the end of adventures, just a place to return to between them. By spring of 1878, a small cabin stood in the valley, with a proper barn and corrals for their growing herd of horses. Ember had been joined by 2 mares and another gelding. Belle had proven herself as skilled with breeding horses as she was with tracking outlaws. They still took the occasional bounty when word reached them of particularly dangerous criminals, their reputation as a formidable team spreading throughout the territories. But more often, they found themselves content with the life they were building, training horses, improving their land, and planning for the future. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin, Belle placed Xander's hand on her still flat stomach. "There will be 3 of us by winter," she said softly. Xander stared at her in wonder, then gathered her in his arms, his heart too full for words. Later that night, he walked to the small fenced area behind their barn where Thunder was buried. He stood there in the moonlight, hat in his hands. "I wish you could have seen this, old friend," he said quietly. "How life changes when you least expect it." He felt Belle's presence before he heard her, the subtle shift in the night air that always accompanied her silent approach. "Talking to Thunder?" she asked, slipping her arm around his waist. Xander nodded. "Thanking him, mostly." Belle rested her head against his shoulder. "For what? If he hadn't died that night, we would never have met. I would never have heard those words that helped me move forward." "What words?" Belle asked. Xander turned to her, taking her face gently between his hands. "You gave him love. That's all any soul needs." Belle smiled, remembering. "I meant it then. I mean it even more now." They walked back to their cabin hand in hand, leaving Thunder's spirit to rest peacefully under the stars. The life they were building together had begun in grief, but was flowering into something beautiful, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the healing power of love. In the years that followed, as their family grew and their ranch prospered, Xander often thought of that fateful night when he wept beside his dying horse. How from that moment of profound loss had come his greatest blessing, Belle, their children, and the understanding that life's purpose was found in loving fully, no matter the cost. And when their children were old enough to understand, he told them Thunder's story not as a tale of sadness, but as the beginning of something wonderful. A reminder that even in our darkest moments, love finds a way to guide us home.